right, I believe we are streaming live. Torey Eisenman, Benchmark Real Estate Group, and we have Jennifer Englert from the Orlando Law Group, and she's here to answer some legal questions. And you know, I think a lot of people are getting nervous with the amount of bills that they have right now, and maybe they haven't gotten any government money. And you know, I wanted to talk a little bit today about some of my past clients that exhausted all of their savings on their bills and paying their mortgage and doing what they believed was right, and then approached me and said, hey, you need to sell our house, we're in foreclosure, and we have no savings left. And we obviously referred those people to an attorney. They were able to stay in their home, eventually get jobs and loan modifications. One's probably mortgages for 60 years, they don't care. They're still in their home. So, you know, I wanted you to share a little bit about, you know, when people are feeling that stress, what are some of their options and opportunities? Because I can't tell them what not to pay, but attorneys have a little bit more leverage than I think I do.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I got asked this week, there's always stuff that I learn about that I would have never thought to do about how to keep things going. Because yeah, especially as people who own businesses, and even eventually there's going to be people who are just employed that lose their jobs, try to do all kinds of people afloat. Normally that ends up being to their detriment. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that you shouldn't do to try to keep afloat, and then once you decide, okay, I cannot keep all this going, what to strategically do and not do. Somebody asked me this week if they could use the money they receive from the government loan, the PPP loan, to pay off some debts and then file for bankruptcy. No, do not do that. Any of the government assistance loans, that sort of thing, if you feel like a bankruptcy might be imminent and you did apply for those loans, the time to have a bankruptcy consult or a consult with at least somebody, debts and things, is now, before you spend any of that money. Whether it's the grant money, the $10,000 grant, which I think a lot of people now have realized because the SBA sent out that email pretty much to everybody who applied that it's not going to be $10,000, you might not get it at all, and or it'll be tied to the number of employees you have, or somebody who applied for the PPP. You won't get the PPP forgiven unless you use it in the right way. And I do believe that eventually if you use the PPP to pay off some bills but not others, and then apply for bankruptcy, you're going to have a problem. The PPP money is federal, the bankruptcy court is federal, and they're probably going to be looking at all of that. So the other thing not to do is not take money from relatives who might have money. If you think that you're not going to be able to pay it back. And I know a lot of people are like, well, nobody ever takes money thinking they're not going to be able to pay it back. But realistically, if you've got a business or you've got something and you're struggling to keep it, like you said, people kind of exhaust every single option and then the inevitable hits them one way or the other. If you have to file a bankruptcy somewhere down the road and either you borrowed money from a family member, or what people tend to do a lot is get a credit card in the family member's name and use it for their expenses, you cannot get rid of that in bankruptcy. We have somebody now who got $100,000. I mean, it's usually fairly large sums of money, thousands and thousands of dollars that they put on a credit card, which they were using in the name of a relative. You cannot bankrupt that. You cannot pay them in advance. You cannot pay them and not pay others. You can't. The bankruptcy court does look back at least 6 months, even in the best of times, and they see where your money went. And if you prefer a family member, then it's going to spoil things. So where it's important now is if you're kind of on that brink, which is what you're talking about, like clients who think, okay, how do I decide what to pay? Now's the time to get some consult with someone so that, again, you don't pay $50,000 to get was the last money you had to your mom because you felt bad because she lent you $200,000, then the court basically tries to claw all that money back because that's what happens. So there's a lot of things. Extending yourself to every single penny usually isn't not a good idea, but if you are going to do that, it should be kind of your pennies. The other thing to not do is take money from a 401k or a qualified retirement plan. You can do that now. The penalties, everybody, I think most people know that if you do that, generally there's a tax consequence and a pretty good penalty, about 25%-ish of whatever you take, you owe back to the government in taxes. They did take that away for now. It was part of the CARES Act to encourage people, if they had to take the money from the 401k. But again, money in a 401k is always protected. Creditors cannot get any money in qualified retirement accounts. That is most IRAs, all 401ks. So once you kind of breach that and take the money out, you lose the protection that you had on it. So while everybody's very tempted to take money from a 401k to keep a business afloat or whatever, if you can avoid it, because it's money that you really, at least the tax consequences isn't there. That's usually one good reason not to do it, but it's protected from all your creditors. When you file for bankruptcy, you could have $1 million in your 401k. They can't touch it. And once you lose that, you lose it. Once you start commingling, it's done. So there's a whole lot of other reasons not to do it either. So try to avoid that. We've talked about all the things not to do, where not to get your money. So then once you don't take any of this, you should try to protect. So then when you're faced with what to pay and what not to pay. I've seen a lot of articles about that. There's people that are already kind of putting that stuff out there. First of all, once you try not to take the money that you shouldn't, or that you can't bankrupt out of or whatever, if you get further into trouble, the next thing I would do is then try to defer as much as possible. Most utility companies now are doing things for people locally. Many car insurance people are saying that car insurance is giving money back. Some are giving it back. A lot of them are just doing a credit. So being aggressive as far as going to all of the people that you owe money to and saying, look, what programs do you have available? What can you do for me? A lot of them, they're going to make you ask. And if you don't ask, you don't get. That's one of the things I like to say to my clients. So ask. If you own a business and you can push off paying vendors or creditors, people that you had on a net 30, maybe you could put them on a net 60 or a net 90. I know people are probably going to try to do that to you too if you have a business and you're not going to want that. But to the extent some people are going to be able to do that or want to do that or defer some money in for a variety of reasons because they're applying for loans or whatever, that sort of thing. So next step is try to defer and or get discounts or do whatever you can before you decide not to pay something. Again, we talked about ostrich syndrome last week. Don't be an ostrich. You know you can't pay this bill, so first call and see what you can do. If you've had a great credit history, maybe they'll let you skip the payment. Maybe they'll, like I said, reduce the payment, refund it, whatever. So then you're at the spot finally where we're going to have to pay things. If you're a renter, there's been a lot of questions about renting and what got deferred and what didn't in evictions. Commercial evictions have stopped in, at least in our local area. It's mostly county by county, so you do have to check. But evictions can still be filed. So landlords are asking, what do I do? You can file an eviction, commercial and residential. Just on the residential side, a summons won't be issued and it won't move forward. But the landlord should go ahead and file because eventually it's going to get moving and there's going to be a whole lot of them to deal with. Earlier in the queue, the better. And that's kind of been advice that we've been giving about anything that's law related. Don't wait to file something if you can, because there's just going to be a delay. It already is the courts can be slow, especially in Orange County. There's a ton of filings for just about everything. So file. Residential, it won't move forward. Commercial will move forward, assuming everybody tries to move it forward. But yeah, don't think that you can go on and not pay rent and something isn't eventually going to happen. Something will eventually happen. The government may extend some of the eviction stays and things. Many of the stays that the governor put into place end today and tomorrow, like kind of the first wave end today and tomorrow. A lot of people have been asking me about that too. Restaurants, because the first thing for restaurants was there was a whole lot of stuff about restaurants, and then the full moratorium came out where nobody could do business unless you're essential. There's a lot of gaps in there. So some people are already thinking, well, maybe I can open. Don't do anything that you're not certain of without asking. Police are coming and shutting people down that are doing the proper social distancing and stuff, but the property taxes, there was property taxes where they extended that till today for Florida. I haven't seen it get extended yet. So that's one of the other things, like things that had gotten extended might extend or might not. So anything that you think you might not owe, it's probably good to circle back around and pay really good attention in the next couple days to see if the governor extends some of that stuff. So assuming evictions you're going to be okay for a while, but rent money, mortgage money, we talked a little bit about that last week. That is stuff that's going to come back pretty quickly. So I would pay for your lodging as quickly as if you can. Even partial payments are better than nothing. Obviously, utilities are important, but most utility companies are deferring some stuff. So ask for the deferral, the discount, all that kind of thing. Obviously, food and medicine is important. I'm going to be putting some stuff out. I was on a call today. There are a lot of resources that are in Central Florida that people are not aware of for food, for medicine, and that sort of thing. It's kind of like if you're not in the know, you're not getting it. So on our Orlando Law Group page, I'm going to get a whole bunch of resources that somebody's putting together at United Against Poverty for research, and a lot of it is food. I think people know Second Harvest, but Second Harvest is totally overloaded with big groups that are going in. The churches are having trouble either getting food or getting volunteers. Knowing that food is one of the really more essential things. There are some resources out there, and jobs as well. I think people kind of have an idea that Publix might be hiring, random places are hiring, Amazon might be hiring. You hear that, but you don't know how to go about it. So we're going to share that information. Torey, I'll make sure you get the email too, so you could share it out to your people. But I think that's the other thing. As you look for resources, there are some jobs out there that are available that it's just a matter them because I know the unemployment money isn't coming, and that's a huge issue as well. I don't have a whole lot of insight on that. I know a lot of people are trying to get in, and it seems like it's kind of the status quo, but using that as a reason to defer, all of those are good things. Resources or stuff to look for. We talked about the HOA. Do pay your HOA. They can foreclose on you. Even a partial payment's better than nothing. We have HOAs that we represent. Most of them are going to waive late fees and that sort of thing, but the actual dues are still owed. We did have people call last week thinking that they didn't have to pay their HOA dues because they couldn't get in the pool and the tennis courts are closed and all that. That is not an excuse not to pay your HOA. Communicating that you can't, communicating that you can only pay $10 toward it, communicating that you're lost your job. Those are all kind of the strategies to employ rather than just kind of doing nothing or assuming that you don't have to pay something that you probably really do.
Well, and last week I had somebody tell me that they did a forbearance agreement with their lender, but they have no paperwork.
Yeah, you cannot rely on what somebody tells you on the phone when you're dealing with your mortgage company, whether it's a first mortgage, second, whatever. A lot of people are doing refinances now, and that's always a way to go about maybe either getting a little bit of extra money in your pocket or maybe taking some money in equity out. Interest rates are a little between 3 and 3.5. A lot of my clients are getting in that range. Nobody's done more than 3.5, but potentially that's something to take a look at too for more funds. When you're looking to see like what you could do to creatively refinance. If you do forbearance, you need to document everything. You need to document every person that you talked to, was when you talk to them. If you can get a fax number or an email address to fax or email a confirmation of your conversation, even if you get a letter, even if it's a PO box address that you get and you could send them something, anything to document, because number one, you run the risk of them saying that the conversation never happened, which is probably the worst thing. But number two is that whatever the terms are that they add on, however they end up doing it, it might be great or it might be awful. It could be you get a 3-month forbearance, but in the meantime, they don't keep your escrow going And then a few months later, not only do you owe the payments that you have, but then they also want like some kind of lump sum. There's all kinds of things that they do in a forbearance agreement. They still want to get their money, and normally the mortgage company tries to get it sooner rather than later, as opposed to if you end up just getting it straight, we add 3 payments on the back end or whatever, that's awesome. So the best you could do to document it, even if you force them to give you some kind of way to communicate with them, and you, like I said, send a letter, fax a letter, send an email, something, because when people come to us later, that's the stuff we can use. Normally, there's so many people that don't do that stuff that even if we have a little bit of information, we can usually convince the mortgage company to see things our way.
Well, and a lot of those lenders, their staff have ID numbers or something that identifies them to that organization. And when times like this happen, they have turnover. So if you don't document that stuff, that doesn't give you any strength when you're having to go back and battle it out with them. You know, we had a customer 8 years ago, or 10 years now, that had lost a job and they couldn't make their mortgage payments, and we connected them with a lawyer. You know, I think that people that are feeling really stressed, I know our suicide hotlines are off the charts with phone calls right now, but there's always a way, and there's always the ability to navigate through these things. And that's why I think you guys are doing free consultations for people. Are you doing that if people have questions about what to do right now?
Well, I mean, yeah, pretty depending for all like the debt stuff, and for the anybody in bankruptcy debt, those are always free consults, even not at all times, not just during this.
So, and there's different kinds of bankruptcy. So I think people need to understand, I've seen people that have filed bankruptcy and their homes have been in the bankruptcy, and I've seen them file bankruptcy and their homes are not included in the bankruptcy. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that can affect somebody?
Yeah, a lot of times, and I don't know, people come to us after they went to somebody else and filed a bankruptcy, and either they didn't understand what was happening or it didn't get explained to them. When people are super stressed out, a lot of, I mean, it happens with me too. I tell them things and it's just sort of like you just don't absorb it because it's just a lot. But yeah, there's the main 2 bankruptcies are Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Chapter 7 is just basically you file for bankruptcy and all your debt is gone. Chapter 13 is a payback time. If you're in a Chapter 13 now, the CARE Act did was give you the ability to extend your payments out. So again, if you're somebody that's already in there and then you can't make your payments, that's stressful too, because say you've been in the 13 for a couple of years and you've gone along paying, doing everything you should, and then you can't, again, go to an attorney right away. We can file a motion to extend it for you, because it would stink for you to lose all that. Because if you default on your 13, everything pretty much comes back. A little bit, the money that you paid towards some of those creditors counts. You don't lose that, but usually like it's nowhere near dollar for dollar. So if you're in a 13 now and you're stressed, see somebody quickly, because that could be fixed.
So,
oh, go ahead.
I just want to bring up real quick, you know, at times like this, somebody comes and knocks on their door and says, hey, I can make sure that your home doesn't get foreclosed on, or I can go to court and I'll buy your home and I'll rent it back to you. Just give me $1,500 or $2,500. Or can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't know that people necessarily know how to differentiate between somebody that's preying on them because they're stressed out and they don't know what questions to ask. And how can they identify whether somebody's legitimate or not? I mean, I know there's investors that have been out there, and I know they were pursued legally because they were not necessarily filing the bankruptcy paperwork, but showing people how to fill out forms, and then they were doing it to stop foreclosures. And there's a right way to do things and there's a wrong way to do things. Can you just briefly talk about how does somebody identify that, and how do they know if they're getting somebody legitimate?
Okay, no, that's a great question, because I mean, the shell bankruptcy to stop a foreclosure is almost never the right thing to do. Especially, again, Central Florida tends to be one of the highest filings for bankruptcy anywhere in the US. Trustees are overworked and they're looking for people who are trying to game the system. And I know people who file just to get foreclosure, automatically they're skeptical because they figure you're only doing it to stop the foreclosure, force the mortgage company into something. A lot of people will file a shell and then drop it 2 days after the foreclosure sale bumps. So that's the thing. People who just come to you and say they'll help you file a bankruptcy, but you kind of just file it. It's called we call it a shell. You kind of put your name on it. You put the house and a few other things. If it's taking you 5 minutes and some non-attorney is helping you, it's probably a shell, and the bankruptcy court is skeptical. Some people have come to us and done it a couple different times during a course of a bankruptcy, or if you had one a couple years before that and you file a shell. And I mean, the bankruptcy court can bring you in and question you and ask you why you did it, who helped you do it. I mean, and you could be sanctioned for it. Normally the person is okay that does it, but then they're going after the people who are out there. Like you said, those people who are going out trying to get people to do this, play this game because they know it's a game. Especially since if it's your homestead, if you have a way to the mortgage or refinance it or do something, you don't need to do all that stuff. And if it's just that you need to stay in the house a little bit longer, normally we can work that out. So the whole shell thing almost never works to your advantage, and it can usually only hurt you, not help you. If you think you can honestly refi, or you're a couple months away from getting a job, or you're on furlough, we can usually make that work. And if you really bankruptcy, Puppy agrees. If you really do need to file a bankruptcy, or you want to keep the house and we need to do a refi, that's where sometimes a 13 comes in. Again, every bankruptcy is different, and anybody who just comes to your door and says they can fix it, cannot fix it. We look at all the things: spouse's income, what you owe, who you owe it to, and then we figure out what's best. A lot of people want to get rid of a house in bankruptcy and they can't even get rid of it because the mortgage company doesn't take it. So it's just a matter of just being smart and knowing all your options, which again is why I always advocate get info right when you know there's going to be a problem. Get all your options, and then you could pick the smartest play.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think people think when they file bankruptcy and they include their property in that bankruptcy that it automatically goes back to the bank. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. So it's crazy. I've fought on both ends. I've actually had to fight banks to take properties back, which is so weird. Unless you've been in that situation, then you get it. So and really pretty much almost every loan you have, when you file for bankruptcy, if you're doing a 13, you're paying it off at a percentage, a small percentage, not dollar for dollar, like I said. And eventually at the end, then whatever you decided to keep and pay off, you get to keep it. In a 7 and in some 13s, once you do the bankruptcy, then you're not liable for the loan anymore, but you could potentially continue with whatever it is. Usually cars and houses are the ones we see the most, but then you have to do something called reaffirming the loan. So you're in your house, you file for bankruptcy, you want to try to stay in the house. We can sometimes do a refi modification in the bankruptcy. That's changed. That process has changed. You could do it in a 7. You could do it in a 13. You couldn't do it in a 7 anymore. Again, that's why you need an expert, someone just knocking on your door and saying they're going to help you. They usually don't have those nuances. But you can, if you do the bankruptcy, like if you do a chapter wipes away everything clean, you can stay in your house and do something called reaffirming the loan, which then usually it's a modification of terms, not always though, but you've got to sign for that. It has to specifically happen, and then you will be liable for the mortgage again, but then you get to stay in the house. If you don't reaffirm the loan, some people totally freak out and move out real fast, and then they just have this house. And then you file for bankruptcy, you're not liable for the house anymore. You moved out because you were like, I'm going to be homeless. Meanwhile, you still own that house. And some banks take like 2 and 3 years to take it back. Again, if you get a squatter in there, you get your insurance, like somebody gets into it, somebody stays there, someone gets in an accident there, any kind of thing could happen. Your pool's going green, you're getting code enforcement liens, and your HOA is coming after you because even though you left that house and you're not taking care of it anymore, meanwhile, your pool is turning green or your house needs to be repainted and your HOA is coming after you. That you didn't bankrupt out because that's new stuff. So yeah, people don't seem to understand that if you move out and stuff still happens at that house, it's yours till the bank takes it. So again, that's something you have to talk to your bankruptcy attorney about to make sure you have a plan, especially for your home or other real estate, rental property, same thing. You vacate and take your stuff out. Meanwhile, you still owe HOA dues and other things that you're not paying, thinking that the bank's going to take care of it, but they're not going to take care of it. And then the HOA, or like I said, code enforcement, we had like a house like with $1 million in code enforcement fines, because once they start, they just keep going. Now, obviously, they're not expecting to get $1 million from you, but then you've got to go to a code enforcement hearing and fight them, and maybe you won't be able to, you're going to have a problem with your next property because you've got a huge lien on an old property. Most people who file for bankruptcy usually can turn around and buy at least a car 6, 8 months later. Houses, a lot of times a year later, sometimes less. With the last kind of downturn, we had people even buying homes within a year. But if you have this thing holding on, like if you have this old property that's still on your books, or these code enforcement liens or whatever, that could ruin your credit for something that you could easily take care of. But if nobody helps you or tells you, you won't even know that you have to.
I think it's important too that you talked about the timeline, because most people think once they get notification that they've gotten a judgment against them, that they have days, or somebody's going to come put caution tape around their home and embarrass them. They don't really understand that process and the length of time. Can you talk a little bit about the steps that can be taken, that it does take time, it doesn't happen overnight, and specifically in some of our court systems, they're backed up?
Right. Well, I mean, like I said, in the bankruptcy context, nothing happens without you being super proactive. So that could be years. If it's just a foreclosure and you finally got a sale date and it's sold. So now, again, locally, they've stopped all foreclosure. So that's not going to happen right now, especially if you might have been in limbo, but nothing's going to happen for a little while, and we're not sure when it's going to start again. But in general, if your house is sold and you're still in it, there's a 10-day window that you have for title to transfer. So nothing happens at all for 10 days because whoever even purchased it in the foreclosure sale, which is usually the mortgage company, but not always, there's the 10-day title transfer window. Normally, that's when people come to us that didn't do anything. The day after the sale or the day of the sale. You can do a motion to try to stop it from transferring. We don't do that unless there's a good reason. But sometimes there is a good reason, like you didn't get proper service, or there are 1,000 reasons why there's a good reason to do that. If you do it within that 10-day window, that's when people try to do that shell bankruptcy and stuff too. But then title won't transfer to the new owner. And then they have to do a court hearing to at least get title. Even when like the mortgage company or whoever has title, normally there's at least a 30 to 60-day window before they do very much. Banks especially, they usually send someone to the property once it's theirs. They put a sign on the door. That's usually when the rekeying and stuff starts. I know some people think like the locks are going to get changed before anything ever happens. They have to notify you, and even at that point, then if they call us at that point, we try to work something out with the new owner to either rent it back, to get more time, to get a cash for keys, to stop fighting. There's all kinds of tools in the toolbox, but if you wait, the longer you wait, the harder it gets.
Well, and I think it's important, I saw back in 2008 through 2010 primarily that a lot of attorneys that didn't necessarily practice in this field were now doing foreclosure defense or bankruptcy, and they didn't really have the knowledge or the experience of somebody that's been doing it for a while. So I think people need to be careful on who they go to. Can you talk a little bit on the investor side? I had somebody reach out to me yesterday, and they were getting ready to buy a home that was on the auction, and they're like, well, they'd never invested in property and they've never purchased an auction property. And they wrote me an email, and I was like, well, first off, once you buy that property, there's somebody living in it. This is not a day that you're just going to go and get possession of a property. So what would you say to an investor that's looking to purchase auction property in the environment we're in now, that we don't know how long the courts are going to extend this?
Right. Well, number one, I think most people know this now, but some people still don't. Make sure you're buying the foreclosure. Don't buy the HOA lien or any of the other liens because you might not actually own anything that's worth anything. So if you get to the foreclosure auction and that's what you buy, which I mean, yeah, you want that, there won't be sales right now, but even if there are sales and then you get like things start again, the evictions are going to be backed up like crazy. Plus, it's not really an eviction, it's called an ejection because you don't have a lease with the person. So it's, I mean, it's generally a little bit more expensive when you don't have a lease to get the person out. So there's that too. I think being proactive and going, I mean, seeing if it's occupied, and then if it is occupied, being proactive and trying to work out something with the person in it. Like I said, most people just banks especially put the sign on the door, and that doesn't do a whole lot of good either, but because then people just freak out. I've had people rip it off. I've had all kinds of things, but trying to work something out where you give the people time to move out and then maybe give them some kind of an agreement where they are renting it, even if it's a month to month, because then if you enter into any kind of lease, no matter what it says, we then could do the eviction, and it's a whole lot easier because it's got terms. If you start a month-to-month lease with somebody, even if it's for not market. So, I mean, if I was buying a property and I saw somebody in it, I would go and say, look, I just bought this. We could do whatever, but I want to give you time. Let's do a month-to-month lease. Like I said, even if it's under market value, it'll still be cheaper than later hiring an attorney to get them out. And then they trash it because they hate you. And you have, I mean, probably any investor knows that whole story. Like it's just easier to try to get along, even if it's short term, you're taking a loss. Long term, it's probably going to be better. And like I said, if you get the lease and you do the month to month, then we've got a specific start date, a specific end date, the 3-day notice, and the stuff we have to post to get them out. If they don't get out, is a whole lot easier, and there's no question about it. So for 100 reasons, going in and trying to enter into some kind of agreement with the person living inside is a great idea. Obviously, if they won't work with you, there's ways to get them out with the sheriff and the courts and all that, but it's going to take a little while, and it's definitely going to be more expensive than just trying to work something out with them. That's a little more calm and peaceful.
Yeah, communication's key, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else for people? Anything that you see happening right now that is unusual or more often happening that they should probably be aware of?
Well, not in the real estate context, but I know we talked a little bit about the need, like family law questions and that sort of thing. One of the things that have just come down at the end of last week that I feel like people need to know about, people doing time sharing with their kids. There was a whole lot of, are people in emergency, like people, first responders, people in hospitals and that sort of thing. If you don't have to switch your kids back and forth because they're technically in higher danger, higher risk, that is not okay. You cannot use that as a reason not to do time sharing. There's a decision right on point in Central Florida that already happened, but there was a bigger one that kind of started making national news where an emergency room doctor was not getting to see his kids because the ex did not let the kids go over there because of risk. And the Florida Supreme Court already shot that down. So one of the things that is important is try to kind of keep that as normal as possible. Again, communicate, try to, even if you cannot get along in the norm with your ex, now is not the time to pick a fight with anyone pretty much about anything. Getting back to our other point, yes, communication is key.
Communication's key.
Try to be as reasonable as possible. Courts, I think, are going to be upset about all this stuff. And what I mean, again, when I have a client that comes to me about anything, like if you act like a reasonable person, I know sometimes it's harder than others. I'm okay to go in, even if it's not exactly what I think the law is or what I would do is if I can explain logically why you did what you did. Usually judges don't get upset. It's when you do stuff that's just doesn't make any sense and it's just spiteful, that's when they get angry. So in all of this, even as difficult as it is, they're going to be a little bit nicer and a little bit cooler about everything. But if you act like a jerk, you're going to get in trouble. So be as reasonable as you can, whether you're a landlord, you're somebody who owes money to somebody, you're the person who all of those things, be as reasonable as possible, because that's what we could, as a lawyer, we could always go to the court and explain why you did what you did if you're a jerk.
So don't be a jerk.
What, it's white hat time, not black hat time.
Anything else aside of some children issues? I know that's happening quite often right now.
Yeah, no, I think that, like I said, trying to keep on top of the biggest stuff that's coming out, that was one of the biggest questions that have been out there and unanswered, and now it's very clearly answered. So don't be the person who withholds your kids.
Okay. You want to share your phone number in case anybody wants to reach out to you and they have some legal questions?
Sure. It's 407-512-4394. Lovely Caroline will answer the phone, or Barb, and they will get you where you need to go.
And they're going to be nice because they're lovely.
They are lovely. We only have nice people working at our law.
Nice and smart. Don't leave the smart part out. All right. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Stay safe out there.
You too. Thanks for the opportunity, Torey.
Appreciate you.